History usually feels like a slow burn, doesn't it? But sometimes, the entire fate of the world can shift in a single afternoon. That's exactly what happened on January 2nd, 1492. Imagine this. We're in the mountains of southern Spain. A man on a majestic horse rides out from the gates of the Alhambra, probably the most beautiful palace on earth. His name is Boabdil, and he is the last Sultan of Granada. He's not riding out to battle. He is riding to meet two people who have been hunting him for 10 long years. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. He doesn't fight. He doesn't run. He simply hands them a set of large iron keys. In that single quiet moment, 780 years of Islamic rule in Spain came to an end. The Middle Ages officially drew to a close. And without anyone realizing it, the door to the Americas was unlocked. Most people think 1492 is all about Columbus sailing the ocean blue. But Columbus was just the aftershock, the Fall of Granada. That was the earthquake. Welcome to the story of how one city's surrender changed the world forever. To understand why this moment was so heavy, you have to understand what was being lost. For centuries, while most of Europe was stumbling through the so-called Dark Ages, Islamic Spain, known as Al-Andalus, was a brilliant beacon of light. This was a civilization of paved roads, streetlights, and public baths at a time when London was still a muddy village. The scholars of Al-Andalus were translating the works of Aristotle, performing complex eye surgery, and mapping the stars with incredible accuracy. It was a society built on the idea of convivencia, a unique period where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived and worked together in relative peace and collaboration. And the crown jewel of this entire world was Granada. Nestled against the stunning Sierra Nevada mountains, it was the last survivor of Al-Andalus, a wealthy, heavily fortified city that controlled the lucrative silk and sugar trade routes. But by the late 1400s, the world was changing fast. The tolerance of the past was being replaced by a new militant hunger for religious and political unity. The walls were closing in on Granada. The force closing those walls was a duo you've definitely heard of, the Catholic Monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. They are history's ultimate power couple. Isabella, the Queen of Castile, was deeply pious and unyielding in her faith. Ferdinand, the King of Aragon, was cunning, strategic, and a master of political maneuvering. When they married, they united Spain's two most powerful kingdoms with one shared, all-consuming goal, the Reconquista, the mission to reclaim every single inch of the Iberian Peninsula for Christianity. By the 1480s, Granada was the only piece left on the board. For 10 years, they didn't just attack Granada, they strangled it. Their strategy was brutal and effective. They systematically burned the surrounding wheat fields, destroying the city's food supply. They captured the smaller towns and fortresses one by one, tightening the noose. They cut off the crucial supply lines from North Africa, isolating Granada from its allies. Inside the magnificent walls of the Alhambra, Sultan Boabdil was trapped in an impossible position. History often remembers him as a weak or cowardly leader, but the truth is far more tragic. He wasn't just facing an external enemy. He was fighting a bitter civil war against his own family, his uncle, and father for control of a dying kingdom, all while the most powerful army in Europe was camped right outside his gates. He was fighting a war on two fronts and losing on both. By the harsh winter of 1491, the situation had become desperate. The food was gone. The people inside the city were starving. Heavy snow blocked the mountain passes, cutting off any hope of escape or reinforcement. The game was over. Boabdil was faced with a terrible choice. He could fight to the death, a final, glorious stand that would inevitably lead to the slaughter of every man, woman, and child in his city. Or he could surrender. He chose to save his people. Secret negotiations were held. The terms of surrender, surprisingly, were quite generous. The treaty stipulated that the Muslims of Granada could stay, they could keep their property, and they could continue to practice their religion freely. Boabdil signed the treaty, hoping to preserve some dignity and safety for his people in the face of inevitable defeat. On the morning of January 2nd, the handover took place. As the Spanish troops marched into the city, they raised a giant silver cross and the royal banner of Castile atop the highest tower of the fortress. A witness reported that when that cross went up, the entire Christian army, which had been fighting for a decade, fell to their knees in the dirt, weeping with joy and exhaustion. Boabdil and his family were exiled. And here we get one of history's most famous legends. As he and his entourage rode away, they stopped at a rocky hill with a final view of the city. Boabdil looked back at the Alhambra, his lost paradise, one last time, and began to cry. His own mother, Aixa, seeing him weep, delivered one of the coldest lines in history. "Do not weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man." That spot, to this day, is known as El Último Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's last sigh. But this incredible story doesn't end with a sigh. It ends with a spark. While all the celebrations were happening in the newly conquered city, a determined Genoese sailor was waiting patiently in the crowd. His name was Christopher Columbus. For years, Columbus had been pitching his crazy idea to Ferdinand and Isabella to fund a voyage west across the Atlantic to reach the East Indies. And for years, they had said no. Not because they thought it was a bad idea, but because they were completely broke. Every last coin was going into the war against Granada. But on January 2nd, everything changed. The war was over. The vast treasury of Granada was seized by the crown. The soldiers were now free. The religious adrenaline from their victory was pumping through their veins. And because Granada fell, Ferdinand and Isabella finally looked at Columbus and said, "Yes, think about that." If Granada had managed to hold out for just 6 more months, Columbus might have given up. He might have taken his proposal to France or England, or simply gone home. The world we know would be completely different. The fall of this one city directly launched the ships that would stumble upon a new world. Even more, the soldiers and commanders who perfected their tactics in the 10-year siege of Granada using cannons, cutting supply lines, and pushing for religious conversion became the conquistadors. They took the brutal lessons learned in Spain and applied them to the Aztec and Inca empires with devastating effect. January 2nd, 1492 was a true hinge of history. In the morning, Europe was still looking inward, fighting an old medieval war. By the evening, its gaze had turned outward, ready to reshape the entire globe. The personal tragedy of Sultan Boabdil was, in a strange and direct way, the beginning of the modern world. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a pivotal moment in history, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I want to know what you think in the comments. Do you see Boabdil as a coward who gave up his kingdom, or as a pragmatic hero for saving his people from a massacre? Let me know down below. I'll see you in the next one.